Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red. It's Nuno Out and Big Ange In.
You know, welcome to Nottingham Forest. How do you feel about starting this new chapter in your career?
It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. Delighted, motivated, and working very hard.
I love Forest.
You're a nice man. You really are a nice man.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. First of all, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure.
This is the end.
Look, I always had a very good relationship
Hold
with
your breath and
Fiona.
count
Last season was very, very, very close,
to 10.
almost daily basis. This season,
Feel the earth
not so well, but I always believe that dialogue and what you say or your opinion is always valid, because my concern is the squad.
For this is the end.
And Nottingham Forest have sacked head coach Nuno Espirito Santo. Nuno was given a new contract in June and guided Forest back into Europe for the first time in 30 years. But cracks appeared in recent weeks.
Swept away, I'm stone.
I'll correct myself. I don't usually win things. I always win things in my second year.
Buying bread from a man in Brussels. He was 6'4" and full of muscle.
I told them and they laughed. I told them and they didn't believe. But here we are.
Postecoglou, straight from the Barbie, he hates the derby, Forest of magic.
It's just who we are, mate. Indeed.
Beautiful.
Indeed. Hello and welcome to Talking Reds and Nottingham Forest podcast, hosted by myself, Greg Oram, and my fellow Forest fanatic from across the Atlantic, Mr. Richard Spray. How are you, Richard?
Well, as can happen when you get some nice rest and you get a good full 8 hours, you generally feel a little bit more clear-headed. But I was a bit panicky last night, but feeling okay this morning, feeling hopeful.
It's never a dull moment of Forest.
Never.
Never. And I woke up to the news. I didn't hear anything last night. I was in bed asleep. I missed all the WhatsApping, all the pinging, all the everything. And I woke up to it this morning. And yeah, it was a shock purely because of the timing. And we'll get into all of that. But first, let me introduce Danscape, who's also with us. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm not too bad. I'm tired because instead of waking up with the news, I couldn't go to sleep with the news. I was sat there thinking about it and obviously, checking all the latest opinions and all that stuff as you do. You get dragged into it. So, tired today and still in that phase of shock, but obviously not complete shock in terms of we knew there was a risk. But, just shock at how quickly it's all changed.
Well, it has. I mean, and that's football, isn't it? It can change so quickly. And so maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. The writing has possibly been on the wall ever since Nuno broke ranks and really went against everything he's ever done at Forest and spoke so openly and so out of turn in that press conference and series of conferences, if you like. We were so used to Nuno really saying very little and almost it being just a non-event. But then you almost knew that something was afoot when Nuno starts calling out the owner, potentially. And then we find out more and more in the press. So we're going to spend the next hour giving you our take on it. And I know that all the other pods have been in hyperdrive, and rightly so. So if you are catching us as well, we're grateful for your support and grateful for you watching. Please do go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe button. We are thrilled to say that we have just passed in the last hour the 1,500 mark on YouTube. 1,501 subscribers now on YouTube, which I have to say is absolutely fantastic. We are so thrilled and so grateful for that. So please, if you haven't hit subscribe already, come and join in the fun. We are on the pathway towards 2,000. Can we hit 2,000 by Christmas? Those that are long-time listeners will know a year ago, we were trying to get to the 1,000 mark by Christmas, and then we literally just managed to get into or over the line as New Year came. So let's try and do the same this year. Okay, enough of that. Richard, I'm back to you. Let's start with Nuno, because there's lots to unpack. I mean, you've given us a kind of a flavour of where you're at, but I mean, are you really surprised? Did Nuno ask for it?
That's the weird sort of dichotomous place and where I'm at from a headspace standpoint. It's the idea that I cannot believe we're here, given what has just happened over the last year. Indelibly, you've got these images burned into your mind of him with Warriors United. You touched on it in the intro there. Brilliant intro, by the way. And then you shift to seeing him so elated when he's giving piggybacks to Ola Aina. You think about the offseason last season where he smiles and hugs and just seemingly developing that vibe, right, Dan? We keep using that phrasing, that vibe that he's brought into the club, and that closeness and that sort of togetherness that's just permeated everything you've witnessed. And then you shift to that uncharacteristic sort of statement, and then somewhat of a double down, a few days, a week later, on that situation, and right before we're getting ready to start a season. And then now fast forward to where we are today, and it's uncharacteristic for him to do that, but it's not uncharacteristic for Evangelos Marinakis to have responded the way that he has. We all said if he's going to say things like this openly and take it out, bring it into the public limelight, he's going to face something probably not desired at the end of it. And that's really unfortunately what's happened. And yeah, so it's a my heart tells me I'm really disappointed and really sad, because he's a wonderful guy, and he's done a hell of a lot for what and for this club just in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's hard to kind of just dismiss that, but at the same time it's also recognizing we know who our owner is. We know he brought Edu in for a reason, and we understand that it seemingly couldn't be repaired, and we are where we are now. So yeah, it's just sort of not a surprise, but at the same time still a bit disappointing and a bit shocking to the system, because now it's just a reset again.
Richard talks about that vibe, Dan, and I guess when you do remember the piggyback that was referenced with Ola, and you talk about the Warriors, and you talk about all the good feeling. I mean, we had it good with Steve Cooper. We found a guy that not only got us into the Premier League, but seemed to get the club. And I kind of feel like that connection to the fans was so longed for by the fan base. So when that ended, when Cooper went, and it did cause a bit of a ripple, to say the very least, but Nuno was announced, it was very much a case of the unknown. There were lots of people that were really, really not happy. One or two people on social media, some of their social media posts are now being retweeted in an effort maybe to kind of highlight that you perhaps shouldn't speak too soon, and maybe you should just keep your powder dry until you let the guy get in through the door. But certainly one or two thought it was quite grim that Nuno was being appointed, and one or two thought it wasn't going to work out. And we know how that turned out. And with Nuno, I'll get to a question in a moment, Dan, I promise. With Nuno, we kind of fell on our feet again, didn't we? With a guy that had his own relationship with the fans. And I've said time and time again, he never forced it. He never pushed it. He never kind of tried to manufacture it. It really, truly organically happened naturally over time. And of course, when the results on the pitch start to be what they were last season, then it's a feel-good factor all the way home. And so I guess when you get to the pre-season that we've just had, and Nuno feels like he's not able to get that vibe to the level he wants it again, the players aren't through the door. I want to implement a change in style in football. I don't have the players yet through the door to be able to pass on my message. Can you understand why he got frustrated and got upset? And also the second part is Mr Marinakis said on the pitch with Morgan Gibbs-White, in the end, we always win. Did he not have really meant, or what he really meant was, in the end, I always win?
That's good. That's a twist. Trying to think of how to answer the question. So, for me, the bond that Nuno created with the players was the key, and it took a while for that to happen, didn't it? Like his first period at the club, he got off to a really good start for like a couple of games, and then it drifted because of everything going on. And at the end of the season, I think everyone was in that same position of not entirely sure where we'd be with him. And then when the results start coming, it's on the back of the fact he's built that bond with the players, and then that translates to the crowd, doesn't it? That's where we all then start to fall in love with him, is that you can see that everybody is on the same page. You can see in the performances and the effort and the reaction and the piggybacks and the penalty shootouts and all that stuff. It tells you that everything's right, and so you buy into all that. And I think that's where that bond and everything comes from, and that is part of being a manager at Forest. I think we're the kind of club that needs that. I don't want to get to a point where we're really good at winning football games, but we're got absolutely no connection to the players and the managers and that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here for the moments. I'm here to follow the journey and the story and all that stuff along the way. So, why it's fallen apart? Well, clearly, I think for me, it has been on the cards for a long time. I know I did that hot take thing, but I think the fact he did no press in the preseason was notable. The fact that he didn't do any kind of interviews at any point during the preseason until the very end, I think that was notable. I think obviously you could sort of just see from his body language as well in photos, and he just looked more stressed. So I think it's been coming, and maybe that's me applying some hindsight, but in that respect, it just seemed like this last summer was a Nuno summer. This summer was not a Nuno summer. So whether it's about Marinakis winning in, my way or the highway and all that, I don't know. I don't think that was the plan. I think if anything, it was just a failed understanding between the two people on how far Nuno believed in what he needed to be successful. He obviously truly had a clear way of saying, this is how I think we have success. And he's tried to make that point. He's tried to make it clear, and he's sort of put himself in a position where it was, in the end, if that wasn't going to happen, he'd sort of undermined his relationship, and he'd given the owner a way out of it by firing him, I think. But I don't think Mr Marinakis went into this thinking, I need to win this, from a PR point of view or anything like that. I think if anything, he would have been perfectly happy for Nuno to have another season and to kind of finish this journey. I know I would. I think that's the way I would have gone with it. But you can't do both. You can't throw people in. You can't try and build an empire with lots of multi-clubs and this, that, and the other, and necessarily keep the guy who's already there happy without having the dialogue, the conversation, and building that relationship. And something seemed to have to give. So, yeah, sad, frustrated, but I guess it's part of modern football. Got to live with.
Yep. Okay. Brucey's with us in the comments, as is Daniel Hall from Australia. He says, good evening from Australia, guys. So, yeah, we're going to get on to the Australian connection very, very soon. And as I mentioned, 1,500 plus subscribers now on YouTube. Thanks for the congratulations from Brucey. Big Arn is with us. He says, farewell and thanks for all the fish. I think I might have missed something there, maybe. Okay. If you want to get your comments in, please do. My own take on this is that I come out and said I thought Nuno would be in charge for Arsenal because, and I was going really, and maybe I got caught with it. Maybe I was being a bit naive. Marinakis, after the Europa draw and everything else, with his comments, seemed to really kind of put some fires out, and it really felt like, look, we're going to try and sort this out. We're going to try and get on the same page, back on the same page, and make sure that we are all in agreement going forwards. Let's not upset the apple cart. But I guess you just never know, really. I mean, apparently, according to the John Percy article, for those that haven't read it, the meeting has never happened. The meeting that Nuno cried for didn't happen. And on the face of it, it sounds like Mr. Marinakis has just thought, you know what, I need a fresh start. And so it comes as no surprise that he's turned in the direction that he's turned, and that is to Ange Postecoglu. So Ange Postecoglu being available, I think, possibly makes a difference. The obvious connection that everyone is probably making is that the Greek connection, and whether that comes into play or not, I don't know. I would think that Postecoglou would want to reject that suggestion. I think he would want to be only judged on his footballing managerial capabilities. So when Nuno starts to make a fuss in the press and when he starts to be outspoken against his usual character, then you're upsetting the apple cart and you are effectively saying to your boss, I'm unhappy with how things are. I'm not going to come and speak to you in person about it, but I'm going to put it out in the media. And that's a bit messy. And we've had, in the last 2-3 years, too much of our in-house business being aired out in public. You know, we've had the Marinakis on the pitch episodes. We've had the tweet episodes. We've had the banning of Gary Neville episodes and other episodes that don't spring to mind that just feel like, you know, we've been in the press for the wrong reasons. And the media are always going to want to make a saga out of something. And we had the Gibbs White saga already in the summer. So, you know, we signed 55 million players in season 1. And this season, this summer window, we've signed 13, which is still not a small amount, by the way, and has gone under the radar. No one's really talking about the amount of signings Nottingham Forest have made for a change. It feels like the signings didn't come at the time that Nuno wanted them, which is why he's got unhappy. So there was talk that it might be Iraola from Bournemouth, who would have been my choice, Silva from Fulham, Jose Mourinho comes available. But I think if we kind of break this down and we look at the Mr Marinakis, let me remove that one moment. Hang on a second, I'll get there. There we go. We look at the statement that Forest have put out. They have confirmed Ange Postecoglu. As you all know, all you Forest fans will know, you don't need me to tell you, he has been confirmed as the new Nottingham Forest manager. Marinakis said of the appointment, we are bringing a coach to the club who has a proven, consistent record of winning trophies. His experience of coaching teams at the highest level, along with his desire to build something special with us at Forest, makes him a fantastic person to help us on our journey and achieve consistently all our ambitions. After gaining promotion to the Premier League and building consistently season after season to secure European football, we now must take the right step to compete with the very best and challenge for trophies. Ange has the credentials and the track record to do this. We are excited he is joining us on our ambitious journey. Okay. So was it always going to be Ange, Richard? I mean, I kind of think it was. I think that if Nuno was getting sacked, and he has been sacked, it was always going to be Ange Postecoglu. What is your initial thought now that you know he is the new Forest manager?
I think it's that sort of vacillation between what we saw at the end of his tenure with Tottenham, and even though he had just won a trophy, it didn't seemingly move the needle too much because then obviously he was let go. So it was just his comments, obviously his sort of stubbornness to shift his mindset and things of that nature, and he became a bit of a polarizing figure towards the end of that period at Tottenham. So I think my mind probably maybe too punitive, too judgmental in some cases. It sounded like from some comments that have been made from some folks when we brought up Ange on our podcast that he had the backing of the players, or at least he seemingly had a good relationship with them. At least that's the prevailing theory. The problem was obviously with the management. So he does seem to have a bit of a track record, which is not a bad thing, of winning managers of the year. I think he won the treble in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, with Celtic. So he's got some pedigree to him that probably makes you have a little bit of hope and positivity. You also take into account what you mentioned earlier, which is where a lot of us came in with an assessment of Nuno's appointment with not feeling all that excited about it either, and ultimately we clearly switched once things started to unfold. So I think I'm in that place now where I'm going, yeah, it seems like it may be a situation of convenience, because I can imagine a Glasner or an Iraola, those types of managers, given where they're at, and Silva, even with his disappointment around their recruitment, still had a job to do and still had a contract and was still ready to continue to press forward with what he's doing. I don't know how they feel about Marinakis, and from on the outside looking in, maybe they looking at him as a challenging prospect of dealing with as an owner. Maybe the stratification of the leadership with Edu, maybe all of that is just not something that anybody was interested in. I'm curious to know at some point in the future if things don't go right and Ange does end up leaving after this season, because he does have a short-term deal. If I'm not mistaken, it's only two years. It'll be very intriguing to hear if there's any information that ever comes out that maybe that he wasn't the first choice. But based off the fact that he is a decent manager and he is available, maybe that was going to be where we had to go. And he does have that. I know we'll get on to the stylistic differences with Dan's stats and so forth. But yeah, not totally shocked at this stage, but hopeful that it may go better than we think, because that was the way things went when we had Nuno. So
from all accounts, it has been reported. I've seen that Marinakis only wanted Postecoglou. Again, that will come out in the wash, I'm sure. But with no compensation to have to pay, maybe that comes into it as well. You know, compensation can be factored in, I think. But also there's a long-standing relationship here. I've seen pictures of when Cooper was the Forest boss and Postecoglou also at Marinakis' villa at the same time, swimming around the pool and things like that. So there is a long-standing relationship there, and he's employed someone he knows. So, Dan, I guess I have to ask, what was it from last season that turned everyone off Ange Postecoglu? Because when Cooper was sacked, I don't know if I said this out loud, I actually quite liked the idea of Ange Postecoglu at that time. I think he was still at Celtic, or he'd just come in, or he was about to come in, or that kind of time span. And so I quite liked Postecoglou. He came into the Premier League actually with quite a good reputation of being a bit of a bloke down under, and everyone could like have a good chat with him and a bit of banter. So what was it that turned everyone off him last season, Dan?
Well, results, I think ultimately.
Beyond that, I mean, you say results, but let me interrupt you. I beg your pardon. But he won the Europa League. Is it purely the fact that they had such a catastrophic Premier League campaign, or has he got an argument that says, you know what, I knew we weren't getting anywhere in the Premier League. I put all my eggs in the Europa basket. My brief was to win a trophy, get us in the Champions League. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
Do you think that was the brief, though? Do you think that's the brief Marinakis is giving him? Say, look, don't worry about the league, just go and win a trophy. I mean,
no, but if we finished 17th and we won the Europa League, how would you feel about that?
I mean, I'd be happy as a one-off, but I don't think that should be the expectation. I mean, if you compare it to Nuno, for example, yes, he didn't win the Europa League, but you can have a good season in the league and have a good season in cup competitions and get to semi-finals and quarter-finals. You know, the final bit of a cup competition is to some extent a little bit of, obviously, fortune, one-off moments and all that sort of stuff. It's not, you can do well in cups without winning them. But anyway, I don't think you can possibly say that the standard can possibly be, you know, win one cup and don't worry about the league. I think, unfortunately, that showed the flaw in his style, which I like. You know, I liked it. I'm like you. I liked his style when he came in, and I kind of liked his style as a person. I think he probably is quite down to earth, and I liked the stuff he was saying about players and, you know, referees and football and all that. But he lost that when the results started, because he kind of then went into grumpy mode, didn't he? He did get very grumpy. You know, he went too far on the grumpy scale. So I think that's probably what turned people off alongside the results. It's kind of like there was nothing left to kind of root for him for, because he wasn't the nice guy anymore, and the results were bad. So I don't know. I mean, if you're a Spurs fan, I'm sure you're happy with that Europa League. But from the outside, it doesn't feel as successful as it probably does as a Spurs fan, because you're looking at it and going, well, yeah, okay, but, you know, they scraped through with a 1-0 win by basically shutting up shop and all that. And people will say, oh, he's learned a lesson by doing that. But it's kind of like, well, that was just because there was no other choice at that point. Like, what he was doing in the league just wasn't working, was it? No, you know, week in, week out, there was no change there to just get the clean sheets and the points needed to just move to mid-table. I mean, to finish 17th with that side and that squad is not good. However, I'm not actually that down on him as an appointment. I'm not trying to say that I am, but I'm just saying that period was not, you know, it just was not acceptable. I don't think you can go into football and say we're just going to write off one competition for another when it's the league and it's the Premier League. And I don't think it was down to that. I think it was down to just a failure of being able to change. And that's the worry. Because I think what we had with Nuno was a perfect fit for where we were when we appointed him, because it was someone that had done something similar to what we wanted, sort of establish a club that was a little bit more of a, you know, relegation threatened sort of side into mid-table consistently, make them tough to beat, move up the league and allow you to build. Whereas this one is much more of a gamble, it feels like, because it's more of a guy who's got one way of playing. And if it's not going to fit, then it's either going to work great or it's not, kind of thing. It doesn't feel like as good of a fit right now for us as it stands.
I mean, there were those injuries last season at Spurs that everyone pointed to as to why they weren't doing so well in the Premier League. But then they did get players back and things didn't really improve. That first season that he came into Spurs, I think they finished 5th, didn't they? And so, you know, I think it's a bit unfair to say he's gung-ho in terms of he sticks to only one way and is not adaptable. I don't see him in the same mould as Amorim at Man United, for example. He seems very stubborn to only want to stick to a certain style of play, come hell or high water, regardless of who he's got in his squad. So let's look at our current squad then, Richard. I mean, we've made all these signings, and I don't want to get into the conversation about who signed who and who agreed that and who said that. We are where we are. Nuno's out the door. Ange is in. This squad now has got attacking talent that we haven't had for a long time, if ever. And so in terms of Ange's style that we can look at from last season and maybe previous seasons where he wants to get on the front foot, he wants to be attacking. You know, the stats out there that everyone's talking about that no team ran more with or without the ball than Ange's team compared to Forest that was at the bottom of that table. So the front forward players seem to be a perfect fit. Where do you see the potential issue with who we've got in our squad and what we've got in our squad?
Well, I think the one thing is, you know, we talk about this in American football when you're talking about your quarterback, right? Which tends to be the focal point of what you do as a team, both in terms of leadership and in terms of how you manage things on the offensive side of the ball. And so they become that central figure to how you set the tone for your team. So who do we have in that sort of position right now? We would all may disagree that Elliot Anderson's really your focal point at this stage, but if he's generally going to be deployed potentially more of a 6, given what we saw against England, that's, I don't know, maybe that's a different way of approaching it. But Morgan Gibbs-White has long been the talisman, the guy that we've built around. So the question becomes, he's not married to him. He's a great player. I'm sure he likes him. I'm sure he sees the talent. And can he get more out of him? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe the shift for Morgan will be a good thing, bit of a reset. But the question will become, in my mind, is if he starts playing, if he continues to play the way that he has in recent times, and he did go absent for quite a significant period. I mean, he did some really nice things off the ball, defensively, etc., when he wasn't creating assists and he wasn't scoring goals. But my question becomes, does that sort of begin to be a bit of a shift because he's got this second level squad that really, I think, many teams would covet because it's better depth than probably what he had at Tottenham. And these are young England under 21 players who have shown the ability to perform. And does that tide shift occur? Do you begin to sort of pivot away from Morgan and maybe he starts to get benched or he starts to become not quite the talismanic figure that we expected? That may be I apologize to anyone who's made that maybe seem like a 180, given everyone knows my history with Morgan Gibbs-White and a love for him as a player. But that's the part I wonder about. Who is he going to see on the training ground? Who's he going to see in these minutes on the pitch during live matches where he says, you know what, I have all the respect in the world for that player, but he's not going to give me what I need. He's not going to help me be front foot, and he's not consistent enough in terms of his ability to generate the attack as he once was. Maybe I'm wrong, and that's fine. I'm happy to be wrong. But with these young players behind, like a McAtee, for example, you can't imagine that Postecoglou is looking at that going, yeah, this is really disappointing that I don't have quite the structure or the setup or the depth that I want. He's got all of those things, I think. He's got the right personnel to get front foot. So I'll be curious to know if players like Morgan become a bit of a potential, it becomes that shift from a player like him as being the focal point, just maybe somebody else, or he just asked him to do a different job potentially because he just doesn't see him quite, providing the right output and the right performance level. But hopefully he does. But I definitely think he's got the personnel there to do the front foot approach.
I think a lot of people are looking at the defense. I've heard Milenkovic's name mentioned more than anything today, and whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I mean, the so-called high line of Ange and the refusal to change it in that game against Chelsea when they had players sent off and they were getting ripped apart. I'd like to think, Dan, that he has come in to Forest having really reflected on his time at Spurs, on both on the field matters and off the field matters. And when it comes to on the field, really looked at his style of play and really looked at what went wrong. I'd be astonished if any manager wouldn't do that. You'd look and go, right, well, what can I learn from this? How can I be different? How can I adapt? As well as looking at the squad you're coming into and the players coming into. Like I said, there's a girth of talent there. There's that word girth. I like that word girth. There's a girth of talent in the Nottingham Forest
You missed
squad.
a soundbite there, by the way.
Don't worry, I was
at?
getting to it.
Okay.
Girth of talent. And so on the field, I'm quite excited about Ange Postecoglu coming in. I am, because I think he could really, he could get us playing some really attractive football that we haven't really been playing. And Nuno's tried to employ this new higher position, and it didn't work against West Ham. We just couldn't find a way through. So, Dan, I know you put together a couple of little bits for us. So,
I'm a stat man.
Moraes fazendo som, fazendo som. Pedrinha Moraes fazendo som, fazendo som. E Pedrinha Moraes fazendo som.
I have to quickly mention Sergio, because that is his favourite piece of music, and every time I play it now, he always springs to mind. But I went to see him in hospital on Sunday. He's doing okay, still there, and he's there for the foreseeable. But he was the first person this morning that I spoke to, because he phoned me just gone 7, because he's an Arsenal fan, and so he's been ribbing me for weeks. Well, yeah, it is weeks. You're gonna get Ange. You're gonna get Ange, laughing down the phone at me. And I was like, no, it's not going to happen. Of course, it's now happened. So, Serge, if you're listening, we love you. We salute you. Get better soon. Danscape.
Yeah, I think we were always going to get Ange, like you touched on. There's a relationship there. I think on Daniel Taylor on one of his podcasts was saying, Ange has been a go-to for the club as like almost a consultant to ask questions on, like, what should we do with this? What should we do with that? Is this normal? And stuff like that. So I think it was always probably going to be him unless he was snapped up by someone else timing-wise. So what does he bring style-wise? So put together a couple of, obviously, the usual sort of profiles of like, is it a counter-attacking team? Is it a smash-and-grab team? How entertaining are they? Do they play like wide, on the wing a lot? Do they dominate the ball on the pitch, or do they sit off? And then I suppose you can see from this, Forest are the red chart, and Spurs from the 23-24 season. So I'm being fair to Ange. I'm giving him his good season, which is the blue chart. And they are opposites, right? So look, we know that. Forest is a counter-attacking team. Last season, we were very much smash and grab, win a game 1-0, win it 2-1. That was our style. Whereas what we didn't provide was the entertainment. We didn't really provide the kind of domination of the pitch or the possession obsession, as it's called on there, which is exactly what Ange did. So if you want a complete 180 in terms of footballing style, then you appoint Ange Postecoglu in lieu of continuing with Nuno, because that's what he brings, and I think he's brought that everywhere. So although you're saying about his adaptation and will he change his ways, I think I'm new to Ange. I've seen a bit of him from Spurs. I liked it. I'm reading what he did in Japan when he was there, and it was very much the same. It was high line. It was defenders on the halfway line. It was doing the same thing. I'm pretty sure it was the same at Celtic, and it was obviously the same at Spurs. So he's not going to be able to implement that straight away. He's not going to be able to completely switch it straight away, but that's what he will be aiming for. And whether we do have the players for that is the big question, and how long he'll be given to implement it. So it is a change in style, and like skill set wise, I suppose this is comparing Ange's 2 seasons at Spurs to see what changed. So the red one is the second season at Spurs, where he's finished 17th, and the blue one is again his kind of good season, finishing 5th in the Premier League. And it's still a similar style of play. He didn't change it massively. There's a couple of tiny changes, but the main one that jumps out is just the level of mistakes that happened last season in the Premier League. That mistake score on the right-hand side of the radar chart there. So the red one being right down as like one of the worst, 10% of teams in Premier League since 2017 for making mistakes that lead to shots and, misplaced passes and all that kind of stuff. So that's what probably undermined last season is the mistakes that were happening, because they were still controlling games and controlling the pitch. They were still creating lots of chances. Their finishing technically even improved last season from the previous season slightly. It's just the mistakes. And I suppose this is where my concern is. I think what we had with Nuno wasn't about tactics. You know, I know we love to go on about tactics and on match day, what formation and this, that, and the other, but a lot of it was about coaching. You look at the way the players transformed under Nuno from where we were under Cooper. Like Chris Wood went from someone no one would put near the starting 11 to the most prolific guy in the league, or at least the most clinical guy in the league, to get the right word. And you saw it with Nico Williams. Gibbs White was brought back into the middle and came back into form. He was out of form. Elliot Anderson has gone from a player that no one really knew where he'd play to being like one of the best centre midfielders. And I'm not saying this is just Nuno, but I think what Nuno brought is he knew when he'd found a good guy in his team. And I think his assistants and his coaches, his goalkeeping coach, his fitness guy, all that, you often hear in articles and stuff that they are well respected and they are top of their game. And I think what Nuno was good at was relationship managing and saying, right, you're a good guy. I'm going to build a relationship with you. You're going to be part of the team. And you're going to then input into this squad to make us as good as we can be. And, you just get the impression they were all good guys, but they were also all experts at what they do. So my question with Ange is whether or not he's got that team and whether he's got that ability, I suppose, to coach his style into these players in a way that keeps them confident and delivers the style he wants to do. Because it is exciting. There's no way you would say scoring more goals and running up and down the pitch more is exciting to watch, but you have to have results, don't you? You can't just have that because after a little while, either way, if you play boring and you don't get results, if you play exciting, you don't get results, whatever style you play, at some point, you have to put the points on the board just enough to obviously move towards what you're aiming to do. So that's where I am with it. Like I say, I don't think it's a definite bad appointment. I'm just saying we've lost a lot of what I think were good traits, and it's a case of can we build that as opposed to tactics and all that stuff.
We're going to speak more about that in just a moment, but first, going to give you this.
The Cheese Trader, based on Grape Lane in York, is a cheese lover's paradise. Home to some wonderful specialty cheeses, relishes and chutneys, and also with a fantastic street food menu. Try their loaded fries or posh cheese on toast. It'll be the best you've ever had. Owned by Forest fan Stu Freestone, the Cheese Trader proudly sponsors Talking Reds. Quote Talking Reds every time to get 10% off your order. The Cheese Trader and Talking Reds, the perfect cheesy mix.
And of course, don't forget you can get your discount any and every time you want to. 10% off with quoting Talking Reds. Okay, so just kind of getting a bit more into Nuno's departure and the appointment of Ange Postecoglu here on Talking Reds. Don't forget, please do go ahead. Hit like and subscribe if you like what you're hearing. If you're on Spotify or Apple, we are hoping that the Apple is going to be resolved. I promise. I keep saying that, but I keep getting promises it's going to get sorted. So yeah, please do give us a follow and give us all the 5-star reviews you can. So Ange kind of turned people off last season, I thought, a lot in the media. He became very abrasive. I was very much turned off him. Someone who was really quite rude to journalists. And I know that journalists are no one to necessarily feel sorry about, but on a human level, I thought sometimes he was just downright not very nice person. And it was a turn off. And I thought, I don't really want him anywhere near my club. And I wonder maybe if that had an effect on the players, thinking maybe that relationship with the Spurs players, that culture, that coaching that Dan's talking about was affected. Maybe they kind of just didn't like him that very much. I don't know. I'm just guessing because Nuno was very, very well liked, I think, by the Forest players. And I'm saying that on the eye test with what we've seen, with the support we've seen from them and all the camaraderie. And I think that goes a long, long way. So to Dan's point, when you're listening to someone coaching you, maybe you're more receptive to their way of doing things. Maybe you're on board fully, really fully with what they want you to do. And that percentile difference can make a huge difference in games. And I'm thinking about when we played Spurs last season, home and away, we got 2 victories. The first time I think we've done that for goodness how long. I mean, we managed loads of firsts last season under Nuno. And I look at the goals that we scored against them, and they were, I think, there was the Chris Wood goal that got lofted over and he headed it in. In those moments, is that Postecoglou's fault? They're not defending properly, or you talked about the increase in mistakes, Dan, as to why maybe they fell apart. So I want to try and turn away from Spurs finishing 17th last season and Postecoglou's influence on that, because I do truly believe in fresh starts. I do truly believe in, look, you've got to just draw a line in the sand and say, this guy is now our manager. Whether I'm in love with the idea fully or I'm solidly against it, it ain't going to change. So I'm trying to, as much as possible, look for all the positives I can in the world as to what this guy can bring to Forest, Richard. And the one that stands out to me first and foremost, whether he won it by default, whether he won it because he had an easy run, whether he won it because it was the worst final in living memory, he did win the Europa League last season. He bought Spurs a European trophy, and I would bite your balls off. I would bite your balls off right now for a semi-final place. I'd see that as huge progression, but to go into the final and win it, that would give us Champions League football next season. So to me, I'm looking at the positives that he was going to be coming in, and the timing for Nuno's departure was one. It's the thing that got me. I was adamant in my head, they can't be keeping Nuno if they picked a Europa squad. And Graham Smith makes a very good point in the comments. He says Ange helped pick the squad with Edu. Nuno would have had no input with his departure looming in the boardroom over the last month. And I wonder, is there something in that? Because stranger things have happened. The timing is the timing. We are a few days away from the international players returning. It's Tuesday as we speak. I think they're back on Thursday. We kick off against Arsenal at the Emirates at 12:30 on Saturday. So the timing is, on the face of it, a bit bonkers. But on the Europa thing, Richard, am I getting a bit carried away now? Am I getting too happy clapper? Am I getting too positive to say that Ange Postecoglu is bringing Europa League winning experience to Forest, and that's the competition we're going into? And do you think there's anything in that he would have been speaking to the boardroom and have had a say in that squad?
Well, firstly, it's a fact that he won it, so I don't think you can say it's happy clapper. And if anyone says that it is, I think they're just ignoring.
No, but I mean, maybe I'm getting carried away with
saying.
that data point, you know.
Yeah, and just the fact that you're putting a lot of emphasis on that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say you're over egging it a bit and being hyperbolic in terms of bringing it up, because I think that has to be part of the thinking. How much influence he had on the squad, I'd be questioning that a little bit, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, he liked an inverted fullback, didn't he? And we had one of those left off the squad. I don't, if he likes wing play, I don't think lacking extra wing depth is going to be something that he may want. So I don't know, maybe I'm, reading too much between the lines in terms of his involvement with that, but I could see the pedigree based off of his winning it last season. You can't deny that. That clearly has an influence. As you said, the longstanding relationship has an influence. The fact that we felt like we were looking at least a little lackadaisical and certainly a little bit stagnant when it came to front foot play and attacking play, at least against West Ham. And even Dan pointed out, there were chance creation. There's degradation in our chance creation just over a period of time late last season in conjunction with what we saw against Palace and then subsequently against West Ham. So from a stylistic standpoint, maybe it favors us because he has put so much money, being Evangelos Marinakis, into that front line of the team, because you felt pretty solidified that the back line was already there. So yeah, I don't think you're taking a spin on it that's a bit too extreme in terms of your emphasis on that, because that has to be part of the processing of Edu or Evangelos Marinakis, or a combination of both, because he clearly showed it, whether it was a poor overall match and they were playing Manchester United, who we know was right there at the bottom with them and pretty awful last season, given that they had talented players on their squad. He still managed to come through it and still managed to get a win in a key moment, in a critical moment, on a big stage. And so you definitely have to value that in terms of what he can bring to the squad, because we went the other direction towards the end of the season. When we had things seemingly locked up to potentially get Champions League, we deteriorated. We've all spoken about the reasons for that. So hopefully because he's been there, done that, even in a difficult, stressful situation. And to your point, in a real world example, we've all dealt with this. I don't care if you've been doing something for close to 3 decades, like he has. If you're not willing to learn from a moment of adversity, a significant moment of adversity, then you're probably not going to be someone that someone wants to bring in such a high profile position with such what seems like a ready-made squad to win. So I have a lot of faith that that's been through, whether that's just relationships, familiarity, love of a certain aspect of his style. If you can't lead people to do the job that they're supposed to do in any way, shape, or form, then I don't think he'd be appointed. So I'm hoping that, as you pointed out, Greg, this is the Europa thing is just adding to the sort of school of hard knocks that he went through last season in order to allow him to come out of that a better manager. Because as Dan pointed out, we all looked at it from afar in that first season and admired how he was doing at Tottenham. And then unfortunately last season it went the opposite direction, but I'm definitely in agreement with you. I think you can't just dismiss the win, even if it was ugly.
I mentioned Dan a few times, and I'm still kind of harping on about it, about how much I was turned off by Ange last year. I mean, him looking down at the floor and not being interested. I'm not saying I want someone to come out all, smiles and flowers and roses all the time, but it felt like the pressure for him was too much at Spurs, and it felt like maybe that was what really kind of made him get really aggy. And I wonder, now he's come to Forest, the pressure's going to be different, I reckon. The media, I don't think the media see Forest as bigger club as Spurs. It's not a London club. Maybe the fact that it was Spurs, maybe the fact that they've got this big stadium, Daniel Levy, who's now departed, of course, and all the rest of it, that maybe played into this whole extra pressure on his shoulders, which maybe brought the worst out in him. And I wonder now that he's at Forest, that maybe the pressure will be less. Maybe we won't see that. What do you want to see from Ange in press conferences? And are you hoping that he approaches it completely differently like I do?
Yeah, the body language thing was weird. You kind of think, how do you lead a team of people when your kind of body language is like that? And I didn't like that. Like I say, I think he's a down to earth guy, but I think you sort of still need to have a little bit of kind of, putting the front on or whatever, don't you? You can't be completely transparent with when you're feeling unhappy or pressure or whatever. You've got to have a little bit of a face to show, to encourage people, to build up the mood and the atmosphere around the place and try and create some kind of spirit. But I think, like I said before, when Nuno came in, or when we started the pod sort of early last season, I felt like I could relate to Nuno. I could understand. He seemed like someone that would just wanted to get on with the football, and he didn't want all the other nonsense, the PSR and the referee stuff and all that. And you could kind of tell that in his demeanour the first season to the second season, when he was a bit more, it was along his lines and it was a bit more in his control. There was none of that nonsense. And I think that's why we've ended up losing him, is because the nonsense came back in the summer. But then with Ange, I think he's quite similar, but in a different way. I think he also probably just wants to get on with the football and the coaching and the tactics and all that. And, I understand why managers get frustrated with some of the daft questions they get asked about, losing games and all that. Are you happy you've lost? And silly questions like that. It's like, so what do I want from him? Yeah, I would like him to be a little bit more open in terms of, a little bit more upbeat. I think he has got the fresh start, so I think he will be. And I think he's probably got clarity here. Most of all, he's probably got clarity that, look, your job is to try and win the Europa League and do okay in the league, and he's probably got the relationship and the backing with the owner, which hopefully will make him a bit cheerier as well than he was.
Well,
I reckon five games in, we're going to probably end up getting this.
You don't know me from a cash order, and you're about to tell the whole flaming world that I'm a narrow-minded redneck.
Maybe not. Paul Morley is joining us because I asked if he could come, and he said he's got a spare 10-15 minutes. So Paul Morley, looking very dapper there, Paul, has joined us with his headset on. He's not in his usual location, so he must be in the office. He must be in the office. So how you doing, Paul? Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Paul? I don't think you can.
I don't think Paul can hear us. Ange. I've got my Ange out there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a delay. Yeah, I can hear you. Maybe you could. There you go. There he is.
So a delay there, I think.
There is a bit of a delay. Whilst you get yourself together, Richard, you're about to jump in. I think you want to add something onto what Dan was saying.
Yeah, this is probably pretty obvious. I mean, all of us who have worked in leadership roles or been in situations where there's a lot of pressure, and like I work at an organization where we've got billions of dollars at risk, and it can be very overwhelming when you feel like there's situations and there's conditions going on that's outside of your control, right? You can't control that there's necessarily injuries. I mean, maybe you could attribute the intensity of what he requests from his players in terms of how they play and the impact that may have. But when you lose critical players like Porro for periods of time, you lose Van de Ven for periods of time, and things of that nature, I mean, it's gonna weigh on you heavily, and you're gonna feel like things are stacked against you. I'm not giving him any sort of out to be a little bit edgy or, as you say, Aggie. Things is what you said, Greg. But it resonates with me that, when I've gone through difficult situations, there have been moments where you go, you know what, I probably didn't handle that the way that I should. I probably didn't, how I framed something, the tone of my voice, my body language, or a combination of all those things probably didn't go as well. So I have a lot of hope that if there's a sort of mate sort of relationship with, with Marinakis, he's going to be like, you see what I just saw when Nuno kind of went a little bit out of his normal mode of operating. I don't want that. I think someone referenced it in the comments. Let's just get back to focusing on the football and not let yourself kind of drift into that sort of like, I'm justified to be a little bit, grumpy, as Dan pointed out earlier, and just sort of, time will tell, obviously, but I just kind of felt like I'm going to give him a benefit of the doubt, because I think, having gone through things myself, where I probably realized, you know what, even if I've been doing this 25 years, which I have in my current profession, I've still got to manage things a little bit better. And I believe that he will. And I think hopefully that a win against Arsenal, right, or a good performance against Arsenal will go a long way in really shifting all of our mindsets in terms of what we're seeing. Because I know that game against Newcastle, when we came out and absolutely, shocked the world with how we approached that, and how Nuno had the boys perform on that day, went a long way to building that credibility. So I'm hoping that's going to be the case.
Okay, right, Paul, I'm going to switch you back on again. Can you hear me now? Let's try and check this delay. Are you with me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, I can. Well, you know what? I think the comments were saying you look like you're about to go on Sky. They're very sexy, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Well, come on and give us your take on Nuno going and Ange coming. Let's hear it.
What's my take? Yeah, look, I don't think it's a massive surprise, is it? It's been brewing for a couple of weeks. So when I went to bed early last night because I had an early start today because I knew I was going to be in the office. I had to get up, get the train at 6, whatever it was. So I missed all the fun when it was kicking off last night. And only when I woke up this morning, saw my phone was red hot. I was like, blimey, what's gone off? And I knew what had gone off before I even read a message. So, not surprised. Ange, what my feeling is about Ange. I don't know if I've warmed to him as the day's gone on. I don't know if that's just me being sort of, wanting to see being the optimist and wanting to see the positives in it. I think, and forgive me, I've not listened to what you guys have been talking about because I've just come out of a meeting. But I guess the one thing I will say, and it's been said, I think, in a few places, is he seems to be the kind of guy that really gets players to buy into his philosophy, and he has a very strong bond in the dressing room. Even when Spurs were tanking last year in the league, it was quite evident that everybody that came out players-wise, if they were interviewed, they all seemed very much behind him. I think you could see that in the Europa League, and I think when he left, there was lots of positive statements from players about thanking the manager privately and personally on social media. You don't often get that, so that's one thing I think which gives me some positive hope that actually, that a lot of the success that we've had with the last two managers has been built on that bond and that spirit, and he seems like the kind of guy who will engender that in the team. Obviously, he's got a bunch of new players who never really had the opportunity to build a relationship with Nuno. So from that perspective, he's kind of it's probably a bit of an advantage in that he's not sort of fighting against a tide as such, where there's a huge number of players that have got this amazing bond with Nuno. Obviously, there will be some that do have, and he's got to work to build that with them. But I think that's one thing which, as I say, makes me feel positive. The one thing that scares the hell out of me is seeing Sels and Milenkovic and whatever passing it around the back, and as the thought of us giving away silly goals. I'm sure you probably already talked about that. Having said that, I do think, and I'm hoping I'm right in to say this, I'm pretty sure that he's not going to be naive enough to think that he can come in and literally flick a switch and it's going to start moving into that style of play from day one. I think when he had when he went into Tottenham, he'd obviously had a pretty much a full pre-season to implement stuff, and he's not got that luxury here. So hopefully he's a bit more measured, and that may be where he ultimately wants to get to. But hopefully that transition is more of a gradual one than something he tries to instill overnight. We'll have to wait and see, because I think if he does try to instill it overnight, we'd probably have a bit of a bumpy road to start with. But yeah, let's see. I'm all for giving him the benefit of the doubt and seeing what happens over the next few months, really, rather than days or weeks. I think we need to give it, probably the rest of the season before you can make a full judgment as to whether it's the right decision or not.
It's interesting because before you came on, I was asking the question about the way that he approached the media and his abrasiveness last season. I was asking the question as to whether that would have rubbed off on the players and whether there were those kind of connections with him that you just mentioned. And yeah, I guess you kind of, I wasn't kind of like suggesting it either way. I was wondering whether that form that dropped off in the Premier League and them not getting results for him, whether that had anything to do with how Ange was as a character. And you've just eloquently put that, he did have those bonds. He did have dressing room behind him, and you are right. I do remember people coming out from the squad and giving nice messages when he left and so on. So I'm hopeful that he is going to come into Forest now, and his first task has got to be to get the squad on the side. Everyone gets a blank page, don't they? And so I think, Richard, you were alluding to it earlier with Morgan Gibbs-White. I think what you were trying to say is, look, his place isn't safe really anymore. Maybe under Nuno, he had credit in the bank, and those bad performances that we've seen from him, Nuno might have been a little bit more hesitant in withdrawing him, whereas with Postecoglou, he might come in and say, you know what, I see James McAtee as the main guy. I'm coming in with a fresh pair of eyes on this, guys, and I'm going to look at these players in training. Whether Gibbs-White's in the England squad or not, James McAtee is a player that I've long coveted. He's a player that I've long wanted. I saw a list that someone put out on X. I don't know if it's true or not because I can't remember the details. I don't know about the details of Postecoglou's wish list at Spurs, but there were players on that wish list that included McAtee and Gibbs-White and Callum Hudson-Odoi and one or two others that he now has all at once at Forest. So, it's like a kid walking into a candy shop for a new manager. And Paul, one of your tweets, I think I saw this morning, was that, or maybe it was in the WhatsApp group, that Forest has got to be one of the most highly sought after jobs in European football at the moment, with the fact we're in the Europa League, we're in the Premier League, we've got a manager that spends money, we've got a squad that has been heavily invested in. So, what's not to like? So, Richard, the question is, Postecoglou walks in, he's going to be going to Arsenal on Saturday as an ex-Spurs manager, so that adds a little bit of flavour to this fixture already. And I have to say as well, quickly, I've got a lot of respect for Ange Postecoglu for taking the job today. He could have quite easily said, I want the job, but I'll take over on Sunday. He could have quite easily said, I'm not going to come in today, mate. It's a bit too late in the day. I'm going to let your coaches get in there. He doesn't want to get a defeat against Arsenal on his record. He's saying, fuck that. I'll come in and I'll take this team and I'll go to Arsenal. And if we get a defeat, so be it. So I've got a lot of respect, Richard, for Ange Postecoglu taking the team today. That, to me, is a big tick in his favour. So, go to the Emirates on Saturday. What are you hoping for?
Well, not what we saw against West Ham. That's probably an obvious statement. I would say that, we talk about immediate, manager bounce, right? I mean, he's given an opportunity to really infect the fan base, and I don't say that in a negative way, in a way that just immediately builds credibility. Like we were just saying a second ago, if winning's the great equalizer, right? Or good performances are the great equalizer. And, there's no moral victories for the most part. We get points for winning. We get points for draws. We don't get points for losses. Clearly, it's an obvious statement, but I just like to see him. I would like to see a bit of a shift in terms of the energy and the determination to get a victory. It felt like that was lacking in the last match. It was sort of waning at certain intervals within the Palace match, but they played pretty well overall and seemingly controlled the majority of that match. So just seeing a little bit more creativity and a little bit more front foot approach, I think, which I know he'll probably instill in those guys right away, because he sees the personnel, as you pointed out, as Paul's saying. He sees what's there. He recognizes the talent. I mean, there's talent at all levels of the pitch, and in both the first team and the second team. I mean, you can make arguments that, someone like Bakwa may end up as a second choice and be on a bench, but most teams he probably would be playing, be the first choice in a lot of instances. So I think he's definitely had to have looked at that and be chomping at the bit to instill that attacking mentality into the squad. So yeah, I have every faith that it will look different, and I have every faith that, whether it be new manager bounce or whether it just be a different philosophy and a different energy, will hopefully provide something that we would consider deemed special and exciting, and build that momentum with the fan base.
New manager bounce, Danscape is a thing. I hope that we get it on Saturday. You're going to have to reach behind you, I think, and look at that picture of Nuno with his hands resting on Ryan Yates' shoulders, and maybe you're going to have to replace that with one of your other pictures potentially, because the king is dead. Long live the king! Yeah, it's a sad moment. I know. I've just quickly hopped on. I mean, it doesn't. The internet, Postecoglou's on it already, and Nuno's out. Yep, I think my internet's going a little bit.
Yeah,
well,
you're
folks.
breaking
Sorry
up a
about
bit.
that if I'm in and out.
You're back now, I think.
Yeah, I'm back. I think about the likes of Ryan Yates, Dan. He's had 7 or 8 managers under his belt since he's been in the team, and he's a player that divides opinion. So I'm just kind of like thinking aloud.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what happens with Ryan Yates, if Postecoglou is another fan of his or not. What about you? And is this new manager bounce something we can hope for?
I hope so. I mean, it helped Nuno massively, didn't it? Given the circumstances when he came in, replacing Cooper, you need that. You need the breathing space. You need a couple of good results early on to just give you the breathing space to settle everything down. Look, I wouldn't expect anything from Arsenal. They don't tend to lose many games, so a point would be a good result. I was just looking at Ange's record with Arsenal, and I think he's played 4, drawn 1, lost 3, so he's not got the best record against.
Due one, then, isn't he? Due one.
He's due one, yeah. So it's just about. It's not ideal. The big test, though, comes in those 2 games afterwards, doesn't it? That's a huge test because they are both newly promoted teams, and that's where it makes or breaks the early part of his. Well, it makes or breaks the whole decision potentially, because we know football's about moments and momentum. It's about just keeping things moving forward enough that you don't bring too much pressure onto yourself that ends up with you showing your poor body language in press conferences and all that when you get asked awkward and silly questions. So he's going to need a good result along the way. Performance-wise, you know what? I take what Richard's saying, but we've dominated the games this season. That's what I'm so from a performance point of view. If we want possession, what we need is a cutting edge. We don't need more of the ball. We don't need more pressing or front foot. We need a cutting edge, and that's going to be hard for him to obviously implement through coaching between now and Saturday. But what he might be able to do is just give a bit of a confidence boost to some of those. They go out and play with a bit of freedom, but I think if you play with too much freedom against Arsenal, then you get beat. So it's just tough. Yeah, it's just a tough start and tough timing. And obviously you touched on the timing of things and earlier on, and it's just that's the big question mark, I think, for everybody, isn't it? If this change had been made at the start of the pre-season or earlier on, I think you'd have given it more time. But where it is now, he has got to buy himself some breathing space with good performances.
Sometimes hitting the ground running and getting in there and getting underway without any preparation, Paul, sometimes that can go in your favour. So we'll have to wait and see on Saturday. One thing I was asking the boys before you came on was about Ange in Europe. And obviously we know he did win the Europa League last season. What kind of impact, if any, do you think that can have on us in the Europa? I put my teeth back in. The word I'm looking for is experience. That experience that he can bring to this Forest team, having navigated through the group phase, having navigated through the knockouts. I mean, that's got to be a positive, right?
Well, it certainly won't be a negative. I mean, he's got to take confidence from that, and he feels like. I mean, even though last season when it wasn't going well for him in the league, he's a kind of guy that he seems to have very, very strong self-belief, and that I think is where that can be positive on the players. And so he will be, he will be feeling that, I've been in this competition before, I know how to win it. And so you boys have got to come on this journey with me. I'll show you how to win this competition. I'll show you how to go far in this competition. So, I think it can only be a positive thing for our European hopes. I mean, I suppose the flip side of that as well, actually, if you've got a settled squad and you've got, a manager who knows the squad, such as Nuno did, then actually that's a good. We were going into that competition in a pretty healthy state anyway, before all this obviously nonsense kicked off in the last few weeks. But I think given where we've come from in the past 10 days, 2 weeks, and now having someone who is in charge, who's won that competition versus somebody who hasn't. Hopefully that will, as you say, that will have a positive impact. I think. I guess the one thing that I've been thinking about all of this in terms of Nuno versus Postecoglou, and what gives us the best chance of having a good season. I know I've said repeatedly on here and elsewhere that I think for us to have the best chance of having a good season, that would be if Nuno stays in charge after this sort of thing kicked off. But I think it was I can't remember who it was. It might have been Adam Summerton or somebody on one of the podcasts made a really good point, and that actually it's all well and good saying that about Nuno and that you want to keep Nuno, that's going to be your best chance. But actually, is this still the same Nuno that was in charge last season? Has he still got the same appetite, the same verve, the same sort of luster for it? But because clearly, even if he just if he had managed to navigate this spell, there was a difference. There was a changing of the tide, and it was kind of it felt like he was going to be fighting against it for the rest of the season if he'd have stayed. So, and that probably would have had a detrimental impact on him eventually, even if he wasn't sort of going to walk. We probably would have seen that. So, I think in terms of the whole decisiveness of what's happened, is probably a good thing. As much as I didn't want it to happen. I think you can be in the camp where you didn't necessarily want it to happen, but you agree with it at the same time. If that makes sense, it's a bit of a weird sort of place to find yourself. But I kind of see both sides of it. So look, going back to your original question, I think Postecoglou's got the European experience clearly, and not just with Forest, but obviously he's got European experience with Celtic as well. I'm not quite sure how well or not he did with them, to be honest, but he's been around the block. He knows how to prepare teams for, and this is where it's crucial. He knows how to prepare teams for Thursday, Sunday, even though arguably that didn't go that well for him last year on the Sundays. It went all right on the Thursdays, but hopefully he's learned from that, and he now knows, and hopefully we don't have an injury crisis like he had last year with Spurs, and so he's got the depth of the squad to be able to hopefully negotiate that a bit better.
Okay, and he's going to be bringing his team in, or lots of his team. Miller Jednak is coming in, I think, with him, who worked with him at Spurs, as well as one or two others. So there's going to be an overhaul in the coaching department, as you expect. Anytime a manager goes, his team tends to go, and the new guy brings in his own team with him. Okay, so we are going to end things there. We're going to be back tomorrow. Talking Reds, we'll be previewing Arsenal tomorrow. A day earlier than we perhaps would normally go on Thursday, just due to scheduling conflicts we've got within the team. So Richard and I'll be back tomorrow with Danscape and Raf, the Random Pundit, to preview Arsenal. And of course, we'll be having more Postecoglou chat on that as well, because trying to preview a game where we probably have no idea who he's going to pick and how it's going to look is going to be quite challenging. But please do go ahead and hit like and subscribe, guys, if you haven't already. Throughout this last hour or so, we've added 4 or 5 new subscribers, which is great. We're up to 1505 now, 1505 subscribers, which again I'm thrilled and grateful for, as is Richard and all the team. Danscape, thank you very much. Great to have you with us. Paul Morley, thanks for hopping on at the very end there to give us your thoughts as well. I'm going to turn to my podcast partner to give us the final thoughts.
Yeah, just let's I don't know. Let's all get behind the managers. I'm sure we all will. Get behind Evangelos Marinakis, because he tends to, do things for the best interest of the club. That's generally been his history, I think. Maybe some might argue with that in some instances, but I'm definitely grateful for the kind of guy he is, and the kind of love that he has for Forest and for the community and so forth. So I guess we'll just embrace it and hope for an incredible performance, and maybe we'll shock the world with with a 1-0 anti and smash and grab moment against Arsenal or something of that nature, and completely shift the tides, right, in terms of what we anticipate to happen. But yeah, definitely excited and definitely looking forward to football again. I'm just, we've all been a little bit fatigued, I think, with just this whole saga, starting with Gibbs White all the way to this moment. So grateful that it's sort of coming to a close, at least this portion of it. We'll see what happens going forward. But you Reds.
Yeah. One thing for certain, running a football club is not easy at all. And Mr. Marinakis doesn't just run one, he runs several. And so you have to look at his record at Nottingham Forest. It is 4 years ago, I think, that we were languishing at the bottom of the Championship with Chris Hughton in charge. I think it was around this time he was getting sacked. And then Mr. Marinakis made the decision to bring in Steve Cooper. And we had the Cooper years. We had the joy. We had the promotion. We went up a level. And then Mr. Marinakis made another tough decision, and he got rid of Cooper, who we all idolised and adored and is going to be forever in our folklore. And he brought in a guy that many of us weren't sure about, but he did it. And sure enough, we had the best season in our history, or recent history, last year when we finished 7th and got into Europe. And Nuno is going to be forevermore in folklore at Nottingham Forest for what he's done. And now Mr. Marinakis turns to Ange Postecoglu, a winner in the Europa League last season, the competition that we're in, plenty to feel optimistic about. Ange Postecoglu says, I always win something in the second season, mate. But listen, things change. It could well be his first season that he does it this time. We're Nottingham Forest. Here we are, mate.
Come join Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.